Welcome to another episode of Meal Prep Monday. I'm your host, Allison Schaaf, and today I'm talking about 5 things I've learned in tracking my time. And before we get into these takeaways, I'm going to go into a bit of a history of me tracking my time. So I actually think it started several years ago. I read a book by Laura Vanderkam on, I think it's just called 168 Hours. Actually, no, it's 168 hours. You have more time than you think. I made a note of it. So that was the name of the book. And in there, she kind of walks through perspective of time. But the big thing is like this time tracking exercise that she has the readers do. And so at the time I did that, and that's where you track kind of everything, your all 168 hours for the week. But the thing that I've carried on through there are my work hours. So I have a little app that's called Hubstaff. I think if you just have one person, it might even be free, but it's a little, I can set up all my different work projects and I use that to track my time. I also use it with the Prep Dish team. And it's, for me, so helpful to look back personally and, Prep Dish team and see, over the course of a year or a quarter, where the time went. And you can really kind of make decisions based on that. Like, oh, this, product that we launched was really successful and it only took, 50 hours total for the whole team. Or, oh my gosh, we are spending 150 hours doing this thing and it's not really going anywhere. So it just really puts things in perspective work-wise. But in today's podcast, what I'm going to focus on is how doing that can also put things in perspective personally. So let's dive into the takeaways from tracking my time. So number 1 is that most things take way less time than I think. So this really is, especially for work hours, there's like small things that maybe if I'm putting off something small, when I'm tracking my time, I'm like, oh my gosh, that thing just took me 6 minutes, or that email. And maybe it is a big email and I have to go back and like look at some numbers and pull up different, previous emails and all this. And I track my time and it's like, okay, it did take 17 minutes. So that's a long time. But, and if you're working for 6 or 8 hours that day, 17 minutes is still like a realistic amount of time to put into a really important email. So yes, most things take way less time than you think. And then the second takeaway, and this builds on that one, is setting timers for tasks that I'm putting off. So this is back to that email example. There's this big email, I'm putting it off. I set a timer. My go-to is usually 20 minutes. And I say, okay, I'm going to work on this for 20 minutes, and see how far I can get. And 9 times out of 10, the task is done before the timer is even up. Bigger projects, sometimes there is more like, oh, I set aside a few hours and I still don't get through it. So it doesn't always work, but the timer does help to just kind of make it something my mind can wrap around. Like, oh, here's, I can do this much and it's not so overwhelming. And then, of course, I'm going to try and tie some of these into meal prep where I can. But when we first launched the super fast plan, so if you're familiar with Prep Dish, we have gluten-free, paleo, and low carb meal plans. And then the fourth one is kind of just overall healthy meals. But the thing that sets the fourth plan aside is it only takes an hour of meal prep. So we call these our super fast plans because, if you put in 1 hour of time, you can get your prep done. And when we first launched these, I would literally go in the kitchen. Well, I would set my timer for an hour, but I remember some of the first plans, I actually had my husband go and do the prep for an hour because I didn't feel like it was quite fair. Yeah, I mean, if I could get it done in an hour, but I realized I've been to culinary school. I cooked for a living for a while. So I'm going to be maybe a little faster than the average chef. So we've timed several people doing the super fast plans, and I would encourage you to. And the thing that I found is not only is it a way to, yes, we can double check that our plans actually require less than an hour of prep, but for you, the consumer, it's a great way to motivate you and be like, okay, let me set my time for an hour and make it fun, kind of make it a challenge. Like, let's see how much I can get done. Again, that's something I do with different work projects, can definitely carry over for meal prep. Okay, number 3, filler tasks actually take a lot more time than you might realize. So this is things like scrolling your phone. If you get into food stuff, it's like inefficiencies with meal prep time. So like every night pulling out your cutting board and chopping like one or two vegetables versus doing it all in one sitting and batching. Doing last minute trips to the grocery store. This is any type of last minute errand. I live in the country, so I am big into batching any errand I'm going to run. I never run into town just to do an errand. I'm already going for something else, and I kind of make to where it's convenient. And most of the time I try and see like, hey, is this an errand that, somehow I can put off or delegate or maybe even not do at all, depending on the trip. But a lot of these little things, if you add them up over time, and if you, try the 168-hour exercise where you track all of your time for a week, you'll see there's all these like little things that are taking a lot more time than you're aware of. So that was number 3. Number 4 is feeling time abundant is a choice. So I think it's really easy to get into the trap of like, oh, I work all the time. So I hear this a lot, like, oh, I work 40-hour weeks, I work 50-hour weeks. I think most people, if they actually track their time, they would realize they work a lot less than they think they might. And I know for me, it's actually helpful to like see that number and be like, oh yeah, like I actually didn't spend my whole day working. Like I worked 5 hours today, and yes, I got a lot of work done and it felt great. But, I also spent 3 hours with my kids, and I'm not always like tracking time like that exactly in my head, but seeing the numbers really helps me to kind of feel that time abundance, if that makes sense. I just think this is, I don't know, I hope I'm explaining this in a way that you guys can understand or that you can relate to. But I think, especially as I became a mom, it's like so easy to feel overwhelmed and feel as if I don't have time for myself, and like have these stories in my head of like, oh, there's no time for Allison, but like seeing it written out, like, oh yeah, like I spent time to go for a walk or I meditated today, and like kind of like seeing numbers just helps me to really feel the time abundance that I have, even when it doesn't feel that way. So it kind of just helps to shift perspectives a little bit, and definitely in a positive way, I find more times than not. And then number 5 on things I've learned from tracking my time is that where you spend your time is a reflection of your priorities and values. So this kind of builds on number 4, but it really is a choice. So the phrase that I really hate is, I don't have time for that. Because in reality, yes, we're all tight on time. We all have, things that we'd rather be doing, but there are always, pockets of time, sometimes bigger or smaller, depending on the season of your life. But, time really is your priority and your values. And, if you're in a heavy work season, then that's your choice, right? Like you're kind of choosing that because of, maybe it's helping your family to get by. And so it doesn't feel like a choice, or, you're spending a lot of time with your kids and it feels like, oh, I don't have a choice. But somewhere along the line, you kind of led up to the choice of like, oh, I want to, spend time with my family. And so just kind of using time to be that reflection of your priorities and values, and seeing it mapped out and tracking your time helps to be like, oh, am I aligned? Like, is this like 1 hour of Netflix every night? Is that like something that's important to me? And for me, sometimes it is, honestly. Like sometimes I feel like having, an hour at the end of the night or 30 minutes in the night to, zone out on a good show. Like I like that. And that's a choice. And that's, I'm being intentional. But there's other nights where I know, my son's going to be up at like 5 a.m. I'm going to be up at 5 a.m. I'd rather, do some stretching and go to bed early. And that's, my priority. So, but just kind of being intentional about it, not letting time be this thing that happens to you, but more like, hey, here's my time. There's actually, there's this time abundance and I can figure out where to use it. I'm going to attempt here to kind of tie this all into meal prep and meal planning a little bit, but I do think when it comes to meals, that is, I was talking about those filler tasks, and like, obviously everyone needs to eat, and, there's going to be time spent with meal prep or even going out to eat, like getting in your car, going to eat, like all of that takes time as well. So I do see meals and meal times, of course, like I've dedicated most of my career to like figuring out how to be more efficient with meals. But I think it's a really good opportunity to, batch and kind of be more thoughtful about how you're going to do your meals for the week. And the big payoff for that is you can get back these little pockets of time. Oh, wow. All of a sudden on Tuesday night, I have this extra 30 minutes And maybe I can sit down and like read a book for 15 minutes or read a book with my kids for 15 minutes instead of them like, pulling at my pants and, complaining as I'm trying to like rummage through the fridge and figure out what I'm going to serve for dinner. So I do think as I have done this tracking of my time, and I've done it for, I don't think I said this in the beginning, but for years, I think, I don't know if it's like 10 years. And now I really just track my work time. I don't so much, I'll go back sometimes for like a week and kind of map it out, but I don't track my full time. The author of that book, I know that I follow her podcast and she definitely still does. Like she still keeps her logs and does all that, which I think is pretty interesting. I don't know if I would ever do that full time, but anyway, it is a good exercise to get into. So if you want to be more intentional and thoughtful with your meals, I will throw out there that you can have 2 weeks free of our Prep Dish meal plans. Just go to prepdish.com/MPM. That's short for Meal Prep Monday. And I would challenge you to try the super fast plan, set your timer, see if it takes you under an hour. Join our Facebook group, post on there, or find me on Instagram, send me a message. I'd love to hear. Or if you're already a subscriber, maybe this isn't something you've done before, is set the timer and see how long does my meal prep actually take me. Again, it just kind of helps to shift that mindset a little bit and change those stories in our head. So hopefully today's episode gave you something to think about. If you are enjoying this podcast and you've not left a rating and review, I would really appreciate that. That just helps other people to find our podcast. That is all I have for today. I will be back again next Monday with a new episode.